Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do spend an hour talking about Hong Kong today, and we will cover sort of the city's agenda and sort of as much of whatever else you guys want to know about Hong Kong and what TNC is doing here. So that's our agenda for today. I've got with me Louisa Ho. Most of you, I think, know Louisa. Louisa's been with the Nature Conservancy for, I think, 4 years, a little over 4 years maybe, and she came to the Nature Conservancy from Honeywell, where she was working on marketing and communications. Before that, she was with Time Life in a couple of different roles, DLA before that, and then she was in Canada for most of her schooling, for high school and college, but born here in Hong Kong and returned to Hong Kong shortly after university. So Louisa's been, she came on board with the Nature Conservancy as a regional marketing, the regional marketing director, but then we quickly realized that, Hong Kong needed the kind of expertise and focus that we knew that she could bring, and so she came on and I think that over the last 2 years has really begun to craft an urban program here in Hong Kong, working with leaders across the Conservancy in the cities program and with cities like New York to try to bring the best practices around conservation and cities to Hong Kong. So we're going to hand off to Louisa, and then she's going to do a PowerPoint. We'll come back, we'll do some questions, and then we'll have some questions from you all in the audience. And if you all don't mind muting your phones, that would be great. That way we can make sure that the audio quality is good for you. And then I'll just hand it off to you, Louisa.
Thanks, Charles. So, well, it's interesting because I grew up in Canada, but I came back to Hong Kong. And a lot of people ask, so are you Chinese or are you Western? And I just say I'm schizophrenic because it really depends on what time, where I'm placed. But it's really interesting because coming back to Hong Kong and seeing the opportunities for conservation, it's fantastic. And I couldn't have found a better place to be. I wanted to first start with the first slide, which is perceptions of Hong Kong. People who fly into Hong Kong are into the city within like 24 minutes of the airport, and what they see is a concrete jungle. Apart from the concentration of skyscrapers, Hong Kong is also a beautiful place where 10 minutes from city center, you're in a national park or a country park. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, and it's great that if people visit Hong Kong for a short time, they see the office, but a lot of the trails in the back of the office is actually a huge opportunity for birding as well as natural hikes.
Yeah, Tim Boucher, for instance,
exactly.
Got 4 new birds. He's a fantastic bird. He's got up to 9,000 birds, I think, life list. He got 4 new birds on his life list right outside the hotel at the office.
Exactly. So in terms of biodiversity, Hong Kong is fantastic, and also with the contrast of development, that's the narrative for Hong Kong. So how is nature and development working together? So just a quick recap of the Hong Kong office. Started in 2002, where we first established. And then by 2012, Charles, I think you moved to Hong Kong, where we established the regional office. Then in between, we've had 4 successive galas and one in 2013, with a total of about 19 million that's generated out from those 5 galas. In addition, Hong Kong is also the place where Asia Pacific Council got launched, as well as our co-chair is sitting in Hong Kong at the moment. In addition, we have an innovative new CRM program. So for example, the partnership with Dragonair, that's netted over 10 million over the last 12 years. Next slide, please. But in 2013, we decided to do something a little bit different. First of all, we launched the membership program, and we launched our first conservation program, which is the youth leadership. And with that, we have, membership is right now about 6,700 roughly supporters, and that's an average monthly donation of $23 to $30, which is substantially higher than the average. And the membership in NatureWorks, in terms of statistics, we have reached over 200 students with 50 schools and launched over 20 projects within the 3 cohorts that we've done. Okay. Just to recap in terms of, sorry, next slide. Just to recap in terms of the team. So we have a person who's looking after the marketing. We have the two conservation programs, the Nature Works, as well as Marine is looking over the conservation project management. We have a philanthropy team under Christina, as well as our membership team with Doris. But very importantly, we also have the Asia Pacific team who's also based in Hong Kong. That's important because for Hong Kong, we have a dual role. First of all, we are looking to support Asia-Pacific programs, both in terms of fundraising as well as awareness building. So in terms of all the issues in terms of livelihoods and water and sustainable funding, things like natural resources, whether it's forests or corals, or food. Hong Kong is, for example, one of the highest concentration of seafood consumption. We consume 4 times the global average. So the importance of sourcing of food is something that is very front of mind for Hong Kongers. And we are committed to have that support and continue that support for the regional programs, including hosting a lot of our scientists that come through Hong Kong. We have a lot of media interviews with them. A lot of the regional press is based in Hong Kong, so that's something that is a huge advantage for us in terms of our brand awareness and raising. Okay. But we also wanted to get into Hong Kong and what we can do here locally. So the second pillar for Hong Kong is looking at what's in our backyard. And because our focus on biodiversity and our opportunities for looking at the development narrative, we have a huge opportunity to protect the lands, including the country parks. So in context, Hong Kong is 75% defined as rural instead of like urban, which is developed. But 40% of those lands are country parks, and that's been managed since 1976. So this is a huge leadership opportunity for Hong Kong to test out how park management and how land management can be done more sustainably. With the pressure and development, this needs a lot of work in terms of how we're protecting it. So TNC is very well placed to come in with eco-region mapping, which is the DNA of what we do. We also have an opportunity to use that data to transform policies and look at financial incentives. And lastly is inspiring both the public as well as youth in terms of how to take on the mantle to carry that forward. I wanted to give you an example in terms of Hong Kong. The first question is why? Why Hong Kong? And it's quite interesting because Hong Kong, it's a very small area. It's about 1,400 square kilometers, but it's roughly made up of 200 islands. But if you see it on the map, on the left-hand side, coming down from the top, are the very low salinity waters from Pearl River Delta. But then if you're looking at it from the bottom of the page, going on the right-hand side going up, those are oceanic waves. And what that means is that we're intertidal, so that you have a lot of species, 5,700 marine species, that are generated from Hong Kong. Huge biodiversity. We've got 80 communities of corals and a lot of different birds. 1/3 of the birds that's designated in China can be found in Hong Kong. So development is also a huge part of it, and the example is Lantau. So Lantau is the largest island in Hong Kong, but what's unique about Lantau is that it's still the last frontier of conservation. So you have the endemic frog species, you have the last 2 water catchments that provide water for Hong Kong. But the north of Lantau is actually heavily developed in terms of the bridge to the Pearl River Delta, as well as the airport that's located on the north. But the south side is also really a great place to maintain conservation. So you have the horseshoe crab on some of the sandy dunes. You have a lot of the sandy beaches that are still untouched. So in terms of conservation, there's still the opportunity to make a difference. It's still very timely as well because the government has issued a blueprint to look at ecotourism and how that's being developed. But they're going at it blindly because the data that they've been using is data 2003. So TNC role is what we're doing is, first of all, looking at baselining, the ecoregion mapping of Lantau as the first starting point, but looking at how to use the data in terms of influencing things like, can we create a conservation easement? What's land trust that we've been so successful in the US, and does it work here? What are some opportunities for green fees, which is fantastic for Palau? Is this something that we can do here in Hong Kong? But aside from the financial incentives, it's also the policy that needs to make a difference. And having a value for ecosystem services has not been done here. So you have to kind of look at it from the government's point of view. You've got the Environmental Bureau and you've got 5 different departments, but the Environmental Department, in context to, say, the Development Department, does not have a voice. And without that financial incentive or the financial articulation of the ecosystem services, it's not going to make a huge dent in how development is being made. So I think that's why TNC can come in at this point in time to really make a difference. Okay. So this is just protect, transform, and inspire, and articulating in a different way. But what I wanted to focus on is also Lantau is just a starting point in terms of how we work on it, because it's timely, as well as it's a very concrete area where we can look at ecosystem mapping. But there's an opportunity for Hong Kong-wide mapping as well, because the same territorial disputes as well as the development issues are Hong Kong-wide. The second project that I wanted to look at was Oysters. Oysters has been part of the Hong Kong culture for the last 700 years. And if you remember the map that I showed you, from the left-hand side, that's where a lot of the water comes in from the Pearl River Delta. And the low salinity has created the oysters, which is a huge commodity in aquaculture. So the aquaculture, to give you a context, the Hong Kong species is about 1.5 million tons that's developed every year, produced every year, of the 7 million tons that's produced around the region. So it's a significant production, but they're suffering from water quality issues as well as ecosystem drainage type of issues as well. So that's on the left-hand side, which is the west. On the east-hand side, we have the pearl oysters, which have traditionally been part of the Hong Kong culture. And the whole definition of Pearl River Delta, that's where it comes from, because Hong Kong produced a lot of the pearls, which was sent out to the Qing Dynasty monarchs at that time. So traditionally, the pearl oysters have been very vibrant on the east side of that. But TNC, when we're looking at ecosystem services and ecosystem restoration, one of the key things that we're trying to achieve is how does that impact communities? So in the project, just next slide. In the project, what we're doing this year is scoping out. We want to look at the historical distribution of these oysters, both in the east and in the west, how quickly that they can aggregate, and looking at those specific data points. Those data points will come into taking the oyster calculator, which is from the global restoration opportunity, and using that to articulate to the likes of the government or other community organizers to see the value of oysters. If we were to create the oyster reef, how much water can it filter and what would be the impact? So I think being that science and having that baseline is something that TNC really brings forth. The other thing that is really cool about this project is we're working in partnership with the China team, so that a lot of the data in the restoration of oysters here can be implemented as a toolkit that can be extrapolated for China down the line. So this is something that is checking all the boxes. It's got the oyster reef restoration in terms of ecosystem services. It's got the science in terms of the oyster calculator. It's got the financial incentives on looking at aquaculture as a trade, as well as looking at policies and how are we equipping the oyster farmers with the political rights and articulating that so that they can at least know where they're farming these oysters. So NatureWorks is the education program which we launched in 2013 as a pilot, and the focus of NatureWorks is really looking at how are you inspiring the next generation of young leaders to take a concept and actually put it down in paper and then roll it out as an execution plan for a community project, both either in the school or in their communities. So as I mentioned, we've reached over 200 students, and one of the students, for example, was looking at how are you looking at air. It started off very vague, so air. So the supply side is tree planting, and as the demand side is reducing e-books, so transitioning to e-books, so they're reducing paper. But at the end of the day, he found a real niche, and through this thought process, where he identified 27 schools, and he managed to convert 27 schools to use recycled paper. And that is on the back of good planning, things like project management, good presentation skills, articulation, and this program gives them that skills when they're still in high school, right before college and right before the skills they can take to the professional life. So this is something that has grown, and this is also something that we're rolling out for the third public year next year. What's different about next year is that we're starting with the schools. So the schools will be looking at nominating a team of 5 across disciplines. So you've got somebody who loves math, that can be in ESG reporting. Somebody who loves architecture, it could be in green architecture. Things like marketing and communications. So different 5 skills that could lead into skill sets that can build their career future down the line that still has an opportunity to contribute to nature. So this also gives an opportunity for the schools to implement those projects, as well as give them an opportunity to have more physical touches and open this up for the community to contribute for volunteer work. So this is kind of more a holistic program, and we're starting with a green scorecard that we're launching. I wanted to talk about NatureWorks because it's also a great example of taking what's global and adapting it for something that's unique in Hong Kong. So it was created with inspiration with NatureWorks Everywhere and the LEAF program, but we focused on leadership skills in Hong Kong because that was what's needed in Hong Kong. But it's also taking the best part of things like creating a rock garden or rain garden that is in the NatureWorks program and bringing it to Hong Kong as well. So the dialogue between global and local is always constant, and we're working with the team very closely there. Okay. And then just very quickly on 3 other things that very highlight and we're still scoping out. One is the China team is very much looking at developing a sponge city program in Shenzhen. And because Shenzhen is very connected, literally, connected to Hong Kong, it makes a lot of sense to have that connection so that things that they're looking at in terms of water management strategies, things like pollution and how they're managing that, has a direct effect on our projects in Hong Kong. So the Shenzhen is something that we're very keen on working together on. The other is sea cucumbers. So coming up in April of next year, there will be an opening of sea cucumber trade in the PNG. So that's something that will set off like a gold rush, and people are clamoring to take advantage of that commodity. But what we're working with Trina and Rick on is looking at creating sustainable sea cucumbers, both on the supply side and looking at working on the co-op with all the villagers and the village chiefs, creating that supply chain, but connecting with, say, WWF in Hong Kong, who has a very strong programs that's marketing to the retailers, the hotels and the restaurants already, and how we're building that link in terms of providing that support so that we are making the best of the facilities and resources on the ground, but creating something that has benefit for our PNG program. So that's the beauty of Hong Kong as well. Sea cucumbers is one of those commodities that is essential to Chinese cuisine. I mean, if you think about shark's fin, people have it like once a year, maybe on a special occasion, but sea cucumbers, everybody has it on their table. So it's it's imperative for us to get this right. And this is a really great launching program that we want to look at. The last program which we're touching upon is corals, because corals in the 60s was as beautiful as Thailand, but it's been very much decimated since the developments in the 90s. And what we're looking at is how are we looking at coral resiliency in Hong Kong? And what's unique about the Hong Kong corals is that it suffers a lot of temperature variances, so more so than any other places in the region. It also has survived remarkably against algae blooms and a population and sewage dumped into the waters. So there's a lot that we can learn from Hong Kong corals in terms of its genetics, but what's important is that we want to see how that relates to coral resiliency and restoration across the different regions as well. And with the corals, we're also looking at restoration in Hong Kong so that we can have a test case that we can restore corals in China eventually. So that summarizes the current programs in Hong Kong. So, I mean, we're still looking at other global initiatives like Heat Island Effect, but these are the ones that we've defined, and we've got funding to get kick-started.